Good afternoon, Lexington, Kentucky. This is Tim Theissen. I am pre-recording this message for you because I'm unable to attend your forum today. I have to be in a national conference up in Chicago, Illinois, and when I talked to the people that were putting the organization together for today, they wanted to include me, and I really appreciate this opportunity. So I'm pre-recording this message for you from my office. My name's Tim Theissen. I'm an attorney practicing in Covington, Kentucky. I have virtually made a career out of zoning in Kentucky, and I have been blessed with the opportunity to perform in almost every role in zoning that you can do in Kentucky. I am right now a practicing attorney, and I represent two rural planning commissions, both in Bracken County and Pendleton County. So I'm an attorney for two planning commissions. I also served myself on the planning commission in my home county, and I served there for 14 years, and I was the chairman of that commission for the last 9 of those years. I also served for 6 years on the Board of Adjustment in the city that I live in, and then I've also had significant experience on kind of what I'll call the other side of the podium. I've represented a lot of developers in zone change applications where we've made presentations to planning commissions, Board of Adjustment, city councils, and fiscal courts around the state of Kentucky, and a few even in Ohio. I also have represented a lot of different citizens groups, people who are opposing a proposed development so that their voices can be heard, and so that the officials that are on those boards had an opportunity to hear the people that were opposed to the proposed development. Also, as an attorney, I've had the opportunity to litigate issues in both state court and federal court on zoning related issues on kind of both sides of the table. So I've had the opportunity to do that as well. And then the last thing I'll mention to you is I've also been retained a couple of times to draft zoning ordinances and subdivision regulations in Kentucky, and so I've had the opportunity to do that. So I've had the opportunity to kind of play just about every role that there is in zoning in Kentucky. I'm here today to talk to you about a special, unique opportunity that can happen for counties in Kentucky. So you're going to have other people speaking to you today that are going to talk about how a zoning ordinance can be an effective tool to help you deal with pipelines that might come into your community, and how zoning is one of the things that is sort of exempted from federal law that allows the states to have some control over pipelines. Someone else is going to talk to you about how counties who already have zoning in place are able to manage and modify their zoning ordinance to address concerns that they have with regard to pipelines and those kinds of things and other kinds of environmental issues in Kentucky. So the purpose of my talk is to actually sort of help you guys understand what a county that does not have zoning yet can do in order to get zoning so that they can answer some of these problems and address some of these concerns. They can do this for this purpose. They can also do it to address a lot of other concerns that they might have in their county. So the first point I want to make to you is that if you know a county or a city that does not have zoning, that might want to have zoning, I want to make a really emphatic point to you that if a zoning ordinance can be properly drafted and if it is presented in the right way, it doesn't have to be political suicide for the elected officials who are proposing it. In other words, there are a lot of people who are concerned about raising zoning in a rural county because it is criticized and considered an excessive regulation and that kind of thing, but it doesn't have to be that. A smaller kind of rural type of county or city in Kentucky simply needs to have a zoning ordinance of the proper type. It doesn't need to have a zoning ordinance like those that are in the cities of like Lexington or Louisville or Covington. Those ordinances are hundreds of pages long. They might have as many as dozens of different zoning districts, and the complexity of an ordinance like that might be enough to distract the community from what they're trying to accomplish and might actually scare off a lot of both elected officials and citizens who might be willing to support zoning in a rural community. So what I have done in the past, by the way, in a couple of different communities now, is to draft zoning ordinances that instead of being hundreds of pages long are only tens of pages long. And zoning ordinance that instead of having dozens of different zoning districts I drafted one that had as little as 3 different zoning districts. So it's sort of like right-sizing a zoning ordinance for the size of community that you have and at the complexity level that's appropriate. Now, a lot of people who are involved in implementing zoning in a new community is aware of the fact that there are some hot potato issues that I'll say you don't want to catch because it'll burn your hands. So the elected officials are concerned about some of these hot potatoes. I'm going to talk to you about specifically 2 of those, all right? The first example I'll talk about of a hot potato issue in a new zoning ordinance is the minimum lot size. So you might hear a lot of people talk about, okay, what's the minimum lot size? And that's considered as a violation of like landowner rights. And so you get a lot of people who advocate against zoning ordinances because of the fact that it interferes with the rights of the landowner to do what they want to with their property. Well, I'll make a point to you. A zoning ordinance in a rural county can actually be done where there is no minimum lot size requirement at all. In other words, the only requirement for a lot to be created in a county like this is where it is large enough to handle a septic system that will deal with the sanitation that is created on that site. It doesn't have to be any larger than that. Now, in some rural communities, they want to set minimum lot sizes so that they can maintain a rural look and a feel to that county, and those are fine. But if that's a hot potato issue, it's not a bad idea to implement a zoning ordinance that doesn't even have a minimum lot size requirement. The second hot potato issue I'll talk about is the concept that if we implement zoning, there might be some existing business in our community that might somehow become illegal, or the word in zoning is non-conforming, and that might restrict or limit that business and its ability to operate or to grow. One of the things that I've done before is to take a specific, go through a specific effort to identify every existing business in the county and make sure that the zoning map and the zoning code is drafted so that their zoning will allow them to continue to do what they are doing. Not just because they're grandfathered in, but because they're actually a permitted use in the zone in which they operate. There's a whole lot of other examples of issues that can come up in zoning that can be a problem to implement in a new community. But again, the point I want to make to you today is that it does not have to be political suicide for an elected official in a small rural county in Kentucky to implement a zoning ordinance in order to try and address these environmental issues like pipelines and any other issues that the county may have that zoning can address. If the county proceeds with implementing a zoning ordinance, and there are actually ways to do it where you can do it without any kind of overwhelming public opposition. It can be done at a fairly reasonable cost. It can also be done reasonably quickly, and a brand new zoning ordinance can actually be adopted in as early as a year from the time that the process has begun. So what I want to do is kind of spend just a few minutes kind of talking to you about the elements of what this looks like, so how you adopt the new zoning ordinance. So the first point I'll make to you is that Kentucky law strongly encourages what's called a joint planning unit. Okay, and what that means is that the cities and county in any given county work together to create a planning unit for their county. The goal of that is that you have one organization that is doing the planning for all of the cities and the county within that county, and by doing that they kind of concentrate the expertise that comes into the process. So the first thing that happens is if a county or a city is going to implement zoning, they have to send out what's called an invitation to the other cities, or if it's a city, to the county, to propose zoning in their county. That invitation has to go out. The other participants have an opportunity to accept or reject that proposal. Whether it's accepted or not, you can still go forward with the zoning ordinance, but you have to ask. If they say, yes, we want to join in with you, then you can create a joint planning unit. If they do not accept it, that's okay. The organization that is proposing the zoning can still move forward with that. Okay? So the next step is, after that invitation process is implemented, then the next thing that the organization can do is actually go ahead and pass an ordinance to create a planning commission. So by creating a planning commission, you're appointing people to it, you are having meetings, you are creating minutes, and you are starting the process towards adopting a zoning ordinance. After you've got a planning commission in place, before they can adopt zoning, there's one other thing they have to do. They have to pass, well, the planning commission has to create a comprehensive plan. All right, so many of you may already know what a comprehensive plan is, but it is basically a booklet. In most counties, in most communities, it's a booklet. And in that booklet, it starts out by laying out a lot of statistical information about the population and about the business activities that are happening within that county. And then there are other elements to that plan that would address what the existing infrastructure in the county is, what the transportation systems look like in the county, identifying what all of the existing land uses are, and then creating some goals and objectives is what they're called. Goals and objectives of how we would want this community to grow in the future. And then the comprehensive plan actually states how we're going to go about trying to implement those goals and sort of plan the future of the community. And one of the primary tools for doing that is with the implementation of a zoning ordinance. Once the comprehensive plan is done, then the next thing that is in step is to adopt a zoning ordinance. All right, so the zoning ordinance can be adopted, and you can also adopt what's called subdivision regulations, which is another set of regulations that kind of work hand in hand sometimes with a zoning ordinance in a county. In order to when you get to this stage, the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance, most communities are going to need some sort of a consultant, some sort of expertise to help them with this. Well, if they're in a county that does not have zoning yet, they may not have people in their community already who can do that. And the reason for that is that if you don't have zoning, you don't have lawyers who are up to speed on it, you may not have planning organizations, private planning organizations that are there. And so a lot of times the communities like that have to reach outside the community to people like myself who can help them through this process, and I've done this before. Another opportunity that most communities have, and that is where the area development district staff can help with that process as well. And so you've got opportunities there for bringing in expertise to get this process started. This process is always more effective, by the way, when the public is invited to participate in it, and they can actually help create what those goals and objectives are. So one of the things that is done in a lot of communities is the planning and scheduling of public meetings where your interested citizens, your business owners, your residents, all have the opportunity to come in and state things that they believe are right about where development ought to happen, where it ought not to happen, what their environmental concerns are, how to address some of those issues in a zoning ordinance. And it's really smart for a community to do as much of this in public meetings and to encourage their citizens, their stakeholders in the community to come in and participate in the process of adopting the zoning ordinance. Once the zoning ordinance is adopted, a county does have to have a zoning administrator. So you do have to have an individual who is hired by the county who administers that zoning ordinance. Now, that does add one more person to the staff, at least one more person to the staff of a small rural county, and so you got a budget issue that you got to deal with there. It can be expensive, it doesn't have to be. And the reason I say that is that in a small rural county or city, a zoning administrator does not need to have to necessarily be a full-time position. I've actually seen counties where they had an individual who was either on staff already that could do it, or would serve as the zoning administrator and also serve in other roles. One typical thing is if it's a county that has adopted the building code, the person who is the building inspector is a kind of an obvious choice sometimes to also be the zoning administrator. It's a similar kind of job, having a code and applying it to new construction, new development, that type of thing. The Planning Commission also will need to hire legal counsel, and that legal counsel can obviously either be some attorney from the community, or sometimes it's smart to hire an attorney from outside of the community. Now that sounds strange, but the reason for that is that when you get a planning commission and you get zoning in place, the local attorneys are going to want to be able to represent the citizens and the people who actually live in the community when they go through the zoning process. by having a lawyer who is from outside the community serve as the attorney for the Planning Commission, you get the benefit of the local attorneys being able to continue to represent their clients like they always have and do it in front of these administrative bodies that make these decisions. So sometimes communities end up hiring attorneys from outside the community like myself, and this has happened with me, where I've come in and initially sometimes it's intended that it'll be a short-term engagement. It turns out with Pendleton County it's 16 years running for me now that I've been representing them. Intended initially to be temporary, turned out to be long-term because quite frankly none of the lawyers in the community really want the job because they need to represent their existing clientele in front of the Planning Commission. There is one other board that has to be created when you have a zoning ordinance. It's called a Board of Adjustment, and that's a board that's sort of parallel to the Planning Commission, so they both operate. It makes certain decisions with regard to the zoning process that are different than the Planning Commission, but it's one more board that is created when you adopt a zoning ordinance. That board has separate minutes, separate meetings, and is a separate appointment. So it's another opportunity for citizens in your community to be involved in the process. One last note I'll make about zoning ordinances that are real important for you all to know, and that is that all of the crucial zoning decisions ultimately are made by the elected officials, not the people who serve on planning commissions and Board of Adjustments. The reason I say that is that there's a lot of citizens who want to be able to have an elected official who is responsive to their concerns and not have some person who is viewed as an appointed official who doesn't necessarily have to answer to the electorate. The important thing for you to know is you can tell your elected officials, look, if we adopt zoning in our county or in our city, you guys maintain control over that decision making. You don't have to worry about appointing people to a planning commission and losing that control. I've done each one of these steps in the zoning process and the creation of a zoning ordinance in a county. I can provide the kind of legal and strategic advice that is kind of needed for a community to be able to achieve their ultimate goals. So if you're aware of a county or a city who does not have zoning that might be interested in implementing zoning for the purpose of addressing these kind of environmental concerns like the pipeline or any other concerns that they have going on in their community, please don't hesitate to encourage them to call me. I'd be happy to follow up with them. Kind of getting to the end of my talk, and unfortunately I'm not able to take questions, obviously, because of this being videotaped, but I will tell you that my name and address and phone number and email address should all be in your materials for today, and so you can feel free to take that, and I would encourage anyone who's here and is interested in this issue or has follow-up questions to email me back, and I'd be happy to talk with them about these and handle that Q&A part of this address after the fact. I'd like to again thank everybody who organized the forum for this opportunity to speak before you today, and I encourage you all to move forward and do what you can to help improve your community and this wonderful state that we all live in.